The Health Fix podcast teaches you how to take charge of your health naturally by giving you the information you need to elevate your health.
Hello there, health junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I'm your host, Dr. Janine Krause. Today, I am interviewing Dan Goodnow. He is a PhD in psychiatric medicine who invented an advanced platform in 1999 to analyze thousands of human tissue samples from around the world, and continues to be the most advanced technology of its day today. Using his technology, he established collaborations with world-renowned international researchers and physicians in dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, multiple cancers, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, just to name a few. Dan Goodnow is an expert on the biochemical basis of disease. His passion is targeting the optimization of human biochemistry for longevity and vitality. And he is on the Health Fix today to talk about plasmalogens, some stuff that you've probably never heard about, but you will be all well-versed by the time we're done here. Dan, welcome to the Health Fix.
Well, thank you very much, Janine. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some stories about plasmalogens and why you haven't heard of these things, and you should have a long, long time ago.
So you've been in this game a while since, when we chatted before, you were talking about plasmalogens years ago, and still no one's heard about it. So
well, it's one of those strange situations. So I'm a synthetic organic chemist originally by training, and then I went into neurochemistry to look at the biochemistry of the brain and understand the biochemical mechanisms associated with different psychiatric diseases. And like happens in some areas where you're doing research and sometimes the tools that you need to do your research don't exist. So you kind of take a pause and start becoming a tool maker. And that's really what happened in the late 80s, early 90s, is that the revolution in molecular biology for gene sequencing and proteomics was getting to a point where they were looking at this conceptually of saying, can I do this complete non-targeted scan of the genome to understand what genes were this? And it created this frenzy of there's a gene for this and a gene for that. But my background really is in the chemistry side of things, the biochemistry of the working systems. And there really wasn't an analogous technology that could look at all the small molecules and do a comprehensive biochemical analysis. And that was really required to understand this stuff. And so that's really where the invention came in. Using high field mass spectrometry, we could measure thousands and thousands of molecules in a biological system. And then once we had that tool, we started using it. And one of the studies we did in the early 2000s was looking at individuals with confirmed diagnosis of dementia and different levels of dementia. And we found when we applied this technology to their blood samples that this class of molecules was consistently lower in individuals that had dementia. And the more severe dementia that they had, the lower the levels were in their blood. And they had this strange molecular formula because most phospholipids have 8 oxygens. These ones had 7. And I was like, what the heck are these things? And I'm a biochemist. So I had to Google this stuff in the early 2000s. And I go, what the hell are these things? And it turns out to be these plasmalogen molecules, right? And instead of a regular glycerol fatty acid bond, they have this ether bond. And I had never even heard of them myself till that date. I go, well, what the hell are these things? There must be some really exotic, esoteric molecule that 3 people in the world know about, right? And turns out, no, that's not true. It's actually, these things have been known for a long time. It's like 20% of your entire brain are these things. Like, it's not, like, these aren't trace levels. Like, your synaptic, like, so all the membranes of your body are primarily phosphorylcholine or phosphorylethanolamines. And we create that phospholipid bilayer that gives our body structure. Otherwise, we'd just be like soup on the floor. And like 60 to 80% of these things are plasmalogens in your brain. Like, it's not a small amount. It's a lot. And I'm going, well, how the hell did I not know about these things? And then if you have a genetic deficiency, if kids are born with a gene with the mutation, they die. So that's not a funny thing. But the point of the matter is that they're so obligate to human survival. And so I started digging into this more and more. And sure enough, there was quite a bit of studies way back in the early 80s and even in the 70s looking at postmortem brain and so on. And they've been known for their antioxidant capabilities because this vinyl ether bond that they have is protective. It's like a sacrificial bond that that'll get metabolized before your critical metabolites like your DHA or arachidonic acid in the brain. So that was really the primary thinking of it. Then people found more information about the membrane structure and how it was involved in vesicular fusion and release of neurotransmitters. And one thing leads to another. So since I'm a synthetic chemist, we started designing and building these plasmalogens to look at the structure-activity relationship, because there's 30, 50 of these things in your blood. Some have DHA on them, some have arachidonic acid on them, some have short-chain fatty acids like oleic acid. So the white matter tracks, so the insulation of your neurons, 80% of the ethanolamines are plasmalogens, and they're the monounsaturated, so they contain oleic acid on their backbone, whereas the gray matter, your neurons, like the synaptic zone, those are all high polyunsaturates, mostly arachidonic acid and then DHA, and that gives it its fluidity and membrane fusion. So the short chain omega-9s make it really a tight packing insulation for the axons. And so anyway, so that's where the plasmalogen story came, and then just one thing leads to another. And the question is, well, is this symptomatic, or is it the lower levels, the higher the deficit in cognition? And it turns out that this is really kind of more of a temporal thing, in that the lower your levels are, the faster your rate of decline is. And so dementia is really a disease of progression, because you're not born with it. And so you take 175-year-olds and line them up at day 0 and say you're all normal, and then you come back in 5 years and some of them have dementia and they have different levels. Well, they just didn't get hit by lightning in that 5-year period. So you had this rate of decline. And so people had if you have a 0 rate of decline, then you maintain your cognitive status indefinitely. And then if you have a fast rate or a slow rate, then when I come back in 5 years, those that are progressing quickly will look on that cross-sectional 5 years later that they have low levels. So really it's the rate of decline. So these plasmalogen levels in the blood and in the brain fundamentally determine your rate of decline. And of course, we want our rate of decline to be 0. But as we get older, our manufacturing capacity decreases. And so they're made in your liver and they're transported across the rest of your body. So, and the story just keeps on getting stranger and stranger. So it's kind of one of those molecules that you can't unknow it once you look at it and you look at the data that's out there. And we're talking large studies, like we've done large longitudinal studies. We just published last year on the ApoE4 genotype subcategories of, we look at 1,200 people, 1,262 people we looked at in Chicago. And so it turns out that you can overcome your genetic risk factors with plasmalogen. So an ApoE4 carrier, which has a historically elevated risk of dementia, if you're an E4 carrier with high blood plasmalogens, you have no increased risk of dementia. And so these are it just gets one of those situations where it's one of those real obvious models. And the weird thing about these plasmalogens is that your body has to make them all. We really get very little, if any, from our diet. And because the last step in their manufacture in your liver that gives them their unique qualities, that vinyl ether bond, also renders it biologically unavailable from a food supply. So, since we have lots of plasmalogens, right? We have in your muscles, your heart, your lungs, and your kidney. But when you eat animal products, the vinyl ether bond gets digested in your stomach because they're sensitive to acid. And so when you eat animal products that contain plasmalogens, very little of it actually gets through your gut. So your body has to make it all. And normally you can make lots of it. And we make lots of them for many, many years. And this was, and so, obviously we focus, how one thing leads to another, right? So the canary in the coal mine is cognition. And that's clearly the most sensitive issue. And I know we want to talk a little bit about advanced athletics and the peripheral neuron system, and we'll get into that in a second, but the cholinergic system seems to be uniquely sensitive to this plasmalogen deficiency. And so, but then you start looking, you start going backwards in time, and the plasmalogen biosynthesis, even though you make lots of it, your body's kind of bathed in it, right? Like your liver, like it's not really like a precisely targeted, because your whole system needs it. And so when you have localized deficits, like in multiple sclerosis or in autism or in, elite athletes, for instance, the overall system can look normal, but your localized deficit from an inflammation, like inflammation in multiple sclerosis, you can have these localized deficits. And so as we get older, more and more people become deficient. From liver failure or for oxidative stress. And at some point, the mass balance shifts such that you're starting to make less than you're consuming, and that just starts to bleed. They just start bleeding out of the system organs. And then at some point in time, you lose that reserve that we all have. And when that reserve is depleted, we start seeing symptoms. We see Parkinson's, we see stroke, and obviously dementia is a key thing. And then on the muscular thing, sarcopenia is an area that I want to get more involved in, because we focus on dementia in the Alzheimer's community. But when you look at it, if you go to a retirement home and look at an Alzheimer's ward versus other types of neurological diseases, you'll see the Alzheimer's ward, most of them are all in wheelchairs. So there's a real significant motor deficit with neurological impairment, specifically the cholinergic system, because all of your muscle neurons are cholinergic neurons. They look different, they're bigger, but they're still the same biochemical mechanism. So that's kind of where we have it. And so, like we said, we played around with structure activity and how to get these things into the blood supply and into the liver. So there's some pretty cool stuff there. So,
well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you can't make it from food, because I think a lot of people are under the impression that we could get potentially what we need as building blocks from our food, as a standard.
Yeah.
And then I think the next part that's interesting that I want to chat a little bit about is how the plasmalogens become degraded or depleted, or how does it work in that case? Because I was thinking about fatty liver. And I was thinking in my head while you were saying it, I'm like, I bet someone would be thinking, well, if I had a fatty liver, is that a benefit because plasmalogens are an oil? Or, anyway, I don't think so. But my point was more on the lines of, if the liver is damaged, like you were mentioning, we're not going to make as many.
Correct. And if you have metabolic syndrome related diseases, have the same problem. And so, so the real advantage of the plasmalogen biosynthesis is also its Achilles heel. Because what's interesting about the plasmalogen biosynthesis in your body is it does not require any essential nutrients. Basic fat can make plasmalogens in your peroxisomes. So your body takes in long-chain fatty acids or any kind of fatty acid pool, and your peroxisomes will do initial stages of beta oxidation to create acetyl-CoA, and then it can build it up and creates the alkyl ether bond. Now, so the cool thing about plasmalogens is your body normally has a lot of ability to make it, and you do not, there's no essential nutrient. Now, in terms of your other neurological functions, like people talk about your DHA and your arachidonic acid and oleic acid. So we have essential dietary requirements of our fatty acid pool, right? So the human body cannot make the omega-6, cannot make the omega-3. And it uses both of those as a countervailing, so you have redundancy. So we normally have a mixture of your omega-3, which leads to your DHA molecule, mixture of your omega-6, which leads to arachidonic acid. Now, of course, arachidonic acid has this bad association of pro-inflammatory aspects of it. But in reality, it's also still essential. And this is, again, where the definition of poison is all in the dose. And so what's happened over time is that your body, obviously with grass-fed meat and the natural food supply, we get more omega-3. But with the large expansion of agriculture and the ability to create, and the need really to create large volumes of energy source, the corn industry and the omega-6 as a general rule, like the linoleic acid pool in our food supply has just gone high relative to the omega-3 pool. So most of us have this wrong ratio. But the point of the matter is that these are typically, for human biology and evolution, these are essential nutrients that we need to get in our diet. Plasmalogens actually protect them. So when you have plasmalogens in your membranes, that vinyl bond is at the outer leaflet. So when you get oxidative stress or inflammation, it'll be the plasmalogen that gets destroyed first. So it'll preserve your essential nutrients, which not just your essential fatty acids like DHA and arachidonic acid and so on, but also your essential vitamins that are also oxidatively stress sensitive that we still need to get from our diet. So plasmalogens are this molecule that your body can make, usually in high quantities. It requires no essential dietary nutrient, and it protects all of these other essential nutrients that we need to get from a regular food supply. As you can imagine, for centuries and millennia of the human evolutionary scene, that this would typically be a very good thing. But we have no adaptation to live to 100 or 200. So there's no selection process. So really, after age, 50, it's kind of apathetic. Like if you live to be 500, fine. If you live to be 55, fine. It's who cares? And so there's no adaptation pressure to say there's no benefit. And so there's been no adaptation to improving plasmalogen biosynthesis. So what we see randomly in the elderly is we see people that have in their 90s just great 30-year level plasmalogens, and these people have beautiful brains, and they have no cognitive impairment, and they're at the same longevity profile at 95 as someone in their 60s with low plasmalogens. And so obviously we don't know exactly why, but sometimes it could just be luck. They don't take much Tylenol, and they whatever it is, and they've kept their liver functioning properly, and they've maintained their exercise or whatever it is to maintain plasmalogen. So, like we know, they're made in peroxisomes. So people that have properly functioning energy utilization, so they have low fasting triglycerides and high HDL levels, you can pretty well predict that those individuals will have pretty healthy plasmalogen levels because they're transported on HDL, and they promote reverse cholesterol transport. So people with high plasmalogens, they export cholesterol really efficiently, and so the body equilibrates its HDL levels, and so they'll increase. So there's little things that we see as we look at large numbers of people. We know you can kind of get a sense of what a really healthy energy profile is, and typically someone with low triglycerides and high HDL levels, that those individuals have efficient energy utilization, so that when you're in your fasting state, when your adipose tissues are shipping triglycerides and fatty acids to your liver, they're just chewing them up and they're happy, and that's what you want. And if your peroxisomes are working, then your liver's making plasmalogens. But unfortunately, that starts to degrade as we get older. So.
Yes, unfortunately, there is all of that part of getting older. Now, I noticed that, two things I'm thinking. One, I want to talk about your testing, because you're kind of mentioning the HDL, you're mentioning triglycerides, and so I'm sure a lot of people are like, all right, so can I get tested for this plasmalogen business? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that. I want to talk about that in a second. The other thing, and now I'm kind of losing it, so I'm going to have to come back to it. I was thinking about something, but let's go to the testing, because I think a lot of people might be thinking about the HDLs and going like, okay, my HDLs aren't bad, and my triglycerides aren't bad either. But, I've got a lot of people that listen to this podcast who are like, I want to live to 105 plus. So,
yeah. So the program scan blood test measures all of your mean phospholipid pools in your blood. So that's a critical thing. So the most important aspect of aging is your membranes. Like we think about, we get caught up in the genes and the proteins, but really your body is 1 trillion cells plus. Each of those cells is a three-dimensional sphere or cube, and all of the walls are phospholipid bilayers. Okay, and one of the most absolutely reproduced observation time and time and time again is that as we get older, we've called it hardening of the arteries, we've called it 1,000 things over the years, but what happens typically is that the cholesterol composition starts to creep up in our membranes, and our phospholipid pool starts to decrease. And fundamentally, that's a cholesterol goes up as your plasmalogens go down, and that creates a stiffness of your membranes. And the membrane fluidity is dependent upon the composition of your membranes. How much DHA is in your membranes versus how much arachidonic acid versus how much linoleic acid. So what the proton scan blood test does is it measures the actual intact phospholipids in your blood supply. And so you're actually getting the speciation. You're not getting someone's not taking your blood and digesting it all and giving you your total omega-3 or your total omega-6 levels. No, you're going to see your plasmalogen levels, your regular ethanolamine levels, your plasmalogen choline levels, which we haven't even talked about. That's really part for your heart function, okay? And your phosphatidylcholine levels. But so the ratio of these is important. How much plasmalogen do you have relative to your other phospholipids, and what is the fatty acid composition? So when you get an inflammation event in the human body, phospholipase A2 is induced, and it reduces the fatty acid from the SN2 position, which is usually arachidonic acid or DHA. Arachidonic acid creates your pro-inflammatory leukotrienes and icosanoids, and then your DHA, your large omega-3, creates your resolvins. So what you want to have your membrane structure of the human body such that you have a high ratio of your omega-3 DHA relative to your arachidonic acid levels, so that when inflammation occurs and that the cell signaling starts, what's getting pumped into the center of your cells is a good mix of DHA versus arachidonic acid. And so you have a higher concentration of resolving, because inflammation is normal and natural. And it's one of those situations where, again, it's just poisons in the dose. So the human body is biochemistry. It's a biochemical massive bioreactor, but it has to use the tools that it has at its disposal. So when you have a sick cell that you need to get rid of, it's going to use naturally endogenous biochemical systems to destroy that cell. Okay? And that's going to be a balance of your joining healthy cell is supposed to be able to tolerate the poison so that the sick cell dies. And so what's important in aging and anti-inflammation is ensuring that the surrounding healthy cell structure isn't adversely affected by the natural toxicity process. Okay, because what happens in multiple sclerosis or autism is that the surrounding cells, they get damaged by the natural inflammatory process. And so it's the resolution of the inflammation that is usually the problem. Like we're even seeing with the COVID-19 with the cytokine storm situation, right? Mm-hmm. So you're having an excess reaction to a natural inflammatory response. And then the problem is that the body's supposed to resolve itself. It's supposed to take that insult, supposed to absorb that insult, and then recover and move on. And that resolving process is where the pro-inflammatory diets of our day today and also affecting our overall mitochondrial health is factoring in. So the proton scan test measures all that. So you understand your actual membrane structure, your omega-3 to omega-6 ratios in terms of your diet. So if you're on omega-3 supplements, it'll tell you whether it's working or not. So because you might be taking a gram or two of fish oil, okay, with 5 bags of Doritos, and that might not matter. That might not be the right thing, right? So you're getting the omega-3, but you're still getting twice or 3 times as much omega-6 in your diet. And so the question really is are you actually getting the desired biochemical composition that you're looking for, that you want to maintain? And same thing if you're doing your exercise. If you get into resistance training, you want to make sure that you're stimulating your plasmalogen biosynthesis, but that you're not excessively consuming it so that again, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And so this is the way, and the whole point of this is to use a knowledge-based system where you can identify, first of all, you have deficiencies, because even if you're eating properly, like our body has essential nutrients that we don't, like, we're told from the 30s and the 50s and whatever, like what essential nutrient is, but these are, we consider essential, non-essential nutrients from a survival basis, not from an optimization basis. Like, for instance, choline, which is it's all over your, like, you require it for everything. And it's considered a non-essential nutrient because technically your body can make it. But it takes a lot of energy to make it. It has other side, it causes oxidative stress. It depletes other pools. So even though technically you're not going to die because your body can make it, it's still not a good thing to be deficient in it. And so this idea of optimizing your biochemical health versus, like, you don't take vitamin C so you don't get scurvy, right? Like, no one gets scurvy anymore, right? So you're not saying, the label on this is to prevent scurvy. Like, it's not happening. Like, so you take vitamin C for its other reasons, right? And so what we have this mindset, oh, vitamin D and rickets and vitamin C and scurvy, but we're way beyond that now. We're saying, okay, how do I maintain optimal biochemical health indefinitely? And what does that mean? And so there's deficiencies that we can have that you don't even know you have. And maybe you're eating properly. Maybe you're having eggs and you're having a little bit of, you're getting choline in your diet. But for whatever reason, it's not getting in. And so the blood test can say, you know what, I'm choline deficient. And we get GTA deficiencies. Like, virtually everyone who gets pancreatic cancer or liver disease will have a choline deficiency. And 10% of the population is walking right now with 10% choline levels versus normal. Okay, and they don't even know it. And it can be fixed with a 10-cent, or a good diet. Like, you can just fix it. And then the GTAs, we measure these anti-inflammatory fatty acids that generate in your gut. They're very long chain. We've studied them in thousands of people around the world. All of the colon cancers, over 90% of all colon cancer cases in the world occur in a 10% population with GTA deficiencies. Like, if you have normal GTA levels in your blood, you don't need a colonoscopy till you're 90. Okay, like, you really don't, unless you have other Crohn's or some other, family history or some other factor. But this is really a science-based model of saying, are there unknown deficiencies in my body that I have no idea? And I would know, you can't feel it. Like, you can't feel your choline levels, right? So you have to measure them. And so that's what this is about. So we measure the known stuff, design a strategy, whether it's diet, supplementation, therapeutics, lifestyle stuff, do it, modify it. And the whole concept is get yourself to a biochemical reserve and get your body to the same way having a bank account, right? And so, because, we can't predict the shit that'll happen in our lives, right? Either in our regular lives or in our biochemical lives. We're out having fun with our buddies, and you get a bad batch of sushi, or you have some food that you just don't agree with. That's random stress that you can't predict that kind of stuff. Just like you can't predict COVID-19 from coming through the radar, right? Or you can't predict some other bad event in your life. And so having biochemical reserve is just smart. It's a matter, and then what we want to do is systematically look at these systems and then allow for that get that reserve, and then relax a little bit. Okay, like so it's not some sort of random, am I going to walk down the street and get hit by lightning and have a disease the next day and I have no idea where the hell it came from? And so that's the kind of what we're trying to get to, is this feeling of, we can't control everything, right? You can't know everything, but there's a hell of a lot more you can know, and it's relatively easy to find it out. And then it's relatively easy to fix some of the stuff. And that's kind of what and so with the plasmalogens, that's what's so cool about it. So we've been able to get this precursor that doesn't have the acid digestion problem that your animal products have. So we can target and restore plasmalogens and get them to the protective levels in everybody now. And so that's the cool thing. So that's the plasmalogen testing. That's Program scan does a bunch of everything.
And so if someone does do a prodrome scan, how long would they do that before they retest to see if they've repleted their plasmalogens and things of that nature?
Probably about a month or two.
Okay.
Again, our whole belief is longevity. So we're talking decades of life here. So the point here is you want to take a few months to get back on track, but you have to build a lifestyle that will sustain you for many, many, many years. So it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term relationship, basically, and then you build other things. Like, it's not like we're agnostic in terms of other testing modalities that people will add to the mix, because you'll have people with certain other health issues that they need to resolve. And likewise, you can take a look at your statin use or your other type of drug use. And if you want to start weaning yourself off certain things, this allows you to say, if you're switching from a pharmaceutical product to a natural product, you can kind of do that and be in control of it.
That's really cool, because I think a lot of people are confused about statins and should they be on it, should they not? There's so many opinions obviously out there as to, are they good, are they bad, and what dosages folks should have. So I think that's really cool to have the prodrome scan test as part of the decision making. You're empowering folks to have a more informed decision.
Yeah, because cholesterol regulation or glucose management, like inflammation, and like these things they're actually not as complicated. Like, I think the medical professions, a lot of people themselves don't understand it, so they don't want to look stupid to their customers, and so we just kind of regurgitate what we've been told to regurgitate, because it's faster and easier. Like, this one-size-fits-all medicine doesn't fit anybody. That's the problem with one-size-fits-all, and unfortunately, that's a time-consuming process, and that's where. So yeah, so I think we have an overutilization of certain drugs that are just used for psychological purposes more than medical purposes. I don't know, personal opinion.
Yeah. So. You may not be alone.
Exactly. So, yeah. So, go ahead.
I was just going to talk about moving forward to talk a little bit about athletes a little bit and talking on that end of things.
Yeah. So that was kind of really like, and again, these things happen. Like, I've been doing this now for 20 years and looking at large studies, and you start with this find the disease, kill the disease mindset, right? It's the all-powerful disease, and it's this mortality science. Like, we focus on this car accident all the time, saying, how do I stop this thing from killing me? And we realize, like, and we stop thinking about just how do we maintain optimal health not in just a goofy pat yourself on the back way, but in an actual medical way. And so these elite athletes, right, which are like the epitome of health and vitality and wellness, they age terribly, right? And so, the health benefits that they clearly have when they're young, okay, is not translating to longevity. So clearly, those individuals that have the healthiest longevity are the moderates, which of course we all know to a certain degree, right? But the question is can we understand a little bit about that why part? So plasmalogens are interesting. So obviously the cholinergic system is really sensitive to plasmalogen deficiencies. And not to get into the real nuts and bolts of it, but it's because how the acetylcholine neurons are very different than the other neurons in the human body. And the neurotransmitter is metabolized before it's brought back up into the cholinergic neuron. Whereas a dopamine or serotonin or noradrenaline neuron, the actual neurotransmitter comes back. And so the acetylcholine neuron uses choline, which unfortunately and fortunately is like a nutrient for everything. So it has, cholinergic neurons have a really specialized way of recharging themselves after a neuron pulse. And that recharging process really gets messed up if they have low plasmalogens. So the point of the matter is, so exercise therapy in the elderly, specifically resistance training, is something I highly recommend, because as we get older, like, our body is fundamentally lazy. right? And we're going to use our cardiovascular system. We're going to use our liver to do most everything. Like we are designed to walk smoothly, our limbs swing. And, by dropping in the middle of a desert, we want you to be able to walk across the desert using the least amount of energy possible so that you can survive, right? And so we have a lot of unused body systems as we get older, like our biceps and our triceps, and we have muscles that we only use intermittently, okay? And so they're kind of dormant. They've kind of been like long-term storage of your liver cells. Like, so you actually have this young biochemistry available to you when you're older that's just been sitting there doing nothing for 40 years or doing very little. And so people that can start doing resistance training, they can start activating the biochemistry of these dormant systems. Now, when you're an elite athlete, when you're younger, you're burning some of these systems out. And so plasmalogens are made, so when you're exercising, exercise is a great way to lower your triglyceride levels because it stimulates energy utilization and you get peroxisomal proliferation, induction, all this healthy stuff. And that's good. But then you're breaking your muscles down and you're rebuilding them. So you're creating oxidative stress. And so a certain amount of stress is good because you create a little bit of stress and then you react to the stress and you get stronger back and forth, right? Like there's a reason why you can't just lie in a hospital bed and be functional. You atrophy. Like your muscles need to work. And the biochemistry of your body needs to work as well. So it needs to have this feedback system. It needs to push and get resistance and push and get resistance all the time. Otherwise, it just stops working. And so as we do more of these program scan testing, we're seeing these young, healthy people with really low plasmalogen levels. They should not have low plasmalogen levels. They should have beautiful, healthy plasmalogen levels because they're doing all the right things. They're exercising, they're doing this, and they have plasmalogen levels of an Alzheimer's patient. And you're going, how the heck is this happening? And so that's kind of where we're interested in learning more, especially in, obviously restoring them, but in terms of just functionality, like peripheral neuron function and response rates, because plasmalogens improve the neurotransmission. It reduces the actual potential threshold for release of neurotransmitters. So you would assume that if you have healthy plasmalogens, that your neuron firing events, and if you're an elite athlete, this could be a trainable opportunity. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we don't know the whole issue, but it does fall. It makes sense when you think of sarcopenia and aging. It makes sense if you take a look at the reduced mobility in Alzheimer's patients. And so we don't know we don't right now. We just have this anecdotal association, and that's the fun thing about the program scan. And this, it's not. You don't need to listen to me. Like you can do it yourself. Like you can figure this stuff out. Like we have some ideas, and we've got history, and we have anecdotal, and we know what's going on. But ultimately, the individual will know what works for them, and that's our goal: is to provide them with tools that they can, optimize.
Absolutely. So, that brings us to the plasmalogen oil and how folks can supplement with plasmalogen oil. And I think one of the big things I'm kind of having in the back of my head, I'm going, okay, so say someone's older, and I'm going to use my dad, for example. He's 84 years old. He has been complaining lately that he has some cognition changes, and he's like, I'm just not as smart as I used to be. And he's like, he did construction his whole life. He's like, I'm building things and I'm doing things, cutting them all wrong. He's like, my brain just is not working lately. Now, the man loves his Miller Lite. Can't pull him away from that. And I probably couldn't get him to do a test, and I'm sure that some people that are listening might be thinking, I've got some family members. Would supplementing with the plasmalogen oil in someone who didn't have testing just to see, so that's my first question. If someone didn't have testing just to see what would happen in terms of cognition, be useful? And if someone's drinking on a regular basis because of the impact on the liver, is it a waste to spend money on plasmalogen?
Well, no. So the testing can be used sometime later in the day just to confirm it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it is the testing is a kind of a curiosity in some ways for the plasmalogens. You definitely don't need to be tested. Quite frankly, the plasmalogen situation is like the vitamin D story, where average levels are deficient. So you really don't, virtually every 80%, there's actually really a small percentage of people that's going to have sufficient plasmalogens at this point in time. Okay, so the answer is, for someone elderly who's having memory issues or mobility issues, the answer is absolutely. The plasmalogen, like we're seeing, like I'm a skeptic, like I'm a card-carrying clinical guy, and you always be very cautious about what's going to work, because you have this preclinical work and you have this hypothesis and you get enamored and you think you're the smartest person in the world. You got to be a little bit careful when you get to the real world. And this is one of those weird situations where it's the opposite. Like I'm the kind of, well, let's just wait and see, and we're getting parents, people emailing me saying, my mom is awake for the first time. She was dancing in her wheelchair last week, like crazy stuff. Like, and it's like, she's following me, or like the other person's like, she's now answering the door, and she, like, so clearly the engagement, we're seeing an almost, well, in fact, I have not actually heard anyone come back that had cognitive impairment issues that actually hasn't been reporting an improvement.
Wow.
Okay, and so clearly it's working in far more than I even expected it to work. And so, because you just don't know, like you don't, like you can have all the theories in the world. We know it's neuroprotective. We know when we give animals this thing, we can't even create neurodegeneration. Like we can't, like in Parkinson's models of, if you pre-treat an animal with plasmalogens and then give them neurotoxins, it's like candy. Like it's like it never happened. Like they don't get sick. It's just crazy. And so this is where that biochemical reserve comes in. So there's always three aspects of a disease that you need to deal with. Okay, one is the symptomatic part of a disease, and we can't cure symptoms. We can only treat symptoms. Okay, a symptom is just is an observation that we want to correct. And then you have the disease process itself. And then process is where the plasmalogen oil comes in. It deals with the disease process. So we can cure the disease process. Okay, curing the disease process is curing the biochemistry associated with an underlying factor. Okay, so we can't actually treat a disease, in my mind. You can only cure a disease or mitigate a disease. And then the third part is the regeneration part. Okay, like you can get your available infrastructure back to normal, but you may have lost 50% of it, right? And so you can't actually make more of what's not there. And so the third part is how much regeneration can occur. And that is not done, the body does its own regenerating, right? The drug doesn't do anything, the supplements don't do anything. What you want to do is you want to create an environment that allows the body's natural regenerative processes to build. And so when you're dealing with an elderly person who's starting to see cognitive symptoms, the first part is obviously they've lost a certain amount of reserve to get there. Okay, and so we can restore the existing cellular structure, which will get that back on track. And that's why we're seeing this in between 2 and 4 weeks. Most people are seeing symptom improvement, which is crazy. It's really crazy to say that out loud. Okay, but that's really what's happening, like in Parkinson's, and it's just crazy. And then the next phase will be, so we can kind of get that boost of function. And then the next phase is the longer phase. Can some of these neurons start, rebuilding themselves? Because you have dormant neurons. Like neurons will shrink and kind of go dormant long before they die. But when you reactivate them, they don't activate instantly. They're like, I tell people, it's like going deaf when you're older, okay? And the parties just aren't fun anymore. I don't want to go to a party because I can't hear anyone talking. And so people, so they stop going out to parties. They start they stop interacting with their neighbors. And so they become isolated. And your neurons socially isolate themselves because when they're plasmalogen deficient, they're basically deaf. They can't hear. But then once you start refreshing them, they don't instantly become party animals the next day, right? So they're going to start feeding. They're going to start slowly building their way out, and that's a natural process. And so the simple question is, for individuals that have cognitive impairment in the elderly, they don't need to get a blood test. They can get on the supplement. And the Prodrome Neuro, we have two plasmalogen supplements. One is designed specifically for neurons, and it's mostly for the elderly because it has the high levels of DHA and DPA. So it's omega-3. It's designed to restore all the peroxisomal critical molecules like DHA and the plasmalogens. And it focuses on the neuron first. It provides the building blocks to rebuild the neurons. And then that's the one for cognition and the elderly. For younger people that don't necessarily have a DHA deficit, okay, we have an omega-9 version, which we call the Prodrome Glia for multiple sclerosis and autism. Because if your plasmalogen deficit is due to inflammation and not due to liver peroxisomal function with aging, then we want to build the white matter back up, and so the Prodrome Glia focuses on the multiple sclerosis side, and that type of situation. So,
cool.
That's what we do.
And so, in terms of taking the plasmalogens, it's an oil, so dropper style.
Yeah.
Is it a teaspoon? Is it a couple drops? How's dosing?
Basically, 1 ml is a good dose for people who want to kind of just maintain and get over time. If you have symptomatic observations, you can go at a higher dose of about 2 mils for a little while, and then you come back down. The plasmalogens will get normalized, and then you can, they will accumulate over time, and then, because it's a mass balance. And so the faster we get, because even though we're supplementing it, you're still making it, right? So our goal is to get your production above your consumption. And the higher we get above that, the faster we can restore the system. And if you have a localized issue, then you can go at a higher dose. But the dosing really is just time and cost, really, because it's basically oil. But you're right, it's a dropper size. I think 2 mils, start with 1 mil a day, and then go to 2 mils a day if you have symptoms. And then once you start seeing symptom improvement, you can bring it probably down to 1 mil, and stay stable at that for time. So.
Wow. Very cool. Now, you also mentioned, before we jump off the call here, I wanted to talk a little bit about dogs, because you had said that your friend's dog or someone's dog was using the oil, and I'm a huge pet lover. I wanted to hear a little bit about
that. This is like, okay, of course, dogs and cats get Alzheimer's and neurological changes. Same, they have different symptoms. So a plasmalogen or dementia in a dog they'll manifest differently. Okay, I'm not going to profess to be a dog expert. Okay, I'm not, but there are definitely dog aging experts. But a friend of mine has an old dog and started giving the dog the plasmalogen, and this little dog just woke up. He used to be just a mopey little thing that would just barely get up, and he starts getting up. He goes and he finds a toy. He actually was jumping up on the stairs at one time, and so you can clearly see like they have the same issues. Dogs and cats will have the exact same. They have the same kind of liver. They're mammals, so they have the same structural functions that we have. And so this whole longevity thing, that's the other thing with plasmalogens and longevity. The numbers are scary. Like, it's a 30-year difference. Like a 95-year-old with high plasmalogens has the same chance of making it to their 100th birthday as a 65-year-old with low plasmalogens has of making it to their 70th birthday. Think of that. That's 30 years difference. Like, it's absolutely scary numbers. And this is not done with 10 people. This is the 1,200 people study over 6 years. These are stupid numbers. And so it's one of those situations where it's really not worth the risk to have low plasmalogens. And so either get them up naturally, exercise properly, get your metabolic control in place, and you can monitor, and then you can, obviously with what we're doing with supplementation is you can guarantee your plasmalogen levels that way.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for providing so much information for folks. I think now everyone knows what plasmalogens are and what they need to be thinking about. Now, How can folks find you online? Give us the rundown for the website and how they can order and things of that nature. And then, of course, folks, I will put my special code in the outro of this podcast.
Excellent. Yeah. So we only sell through doctors and healthcare professionals like yourself, Janine. And so our website is protomesciences.com. You'll have some information on there, list to our references, I'll have some online presentations. Like depending how far down Alice's rabbit hole you want to go, I'll go there with you. Like there's deep science on all of this stuff. The biochemistry, the synthesis, the bioavailability, as deep as you want to get in the science and you have an aptitude for, it's there. And then the prodome.com site is our e-commerce site that the doctors will be involved, and you can obviously use Janine's code now and you'll get a nice discount. And that part is the process. And then we're going to continually develop this concept of biochemical reserve. The plasmalogens are critical, but there's other areas of your body that you want to maintain reserve capacity. And so, but that's what we do. So for sure.
Excellent. And is it possible to get access to the research study that you were talking about so I could put that on the podcast notes?
Definitely. I can send you a link to it and we can go from there for sure.
Perfect. Folks, that will be on at drjkrausend.com or thehealthfixpodcast.com in the show notes for this episode. Yeah. All right, Dan, thank you
I got a couple, actually, what's really interesting, I got a couple posters that we presented at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference. And that it's kind of an easy visual for people to look at
Excellent.
In one way. So
excellent. I think that anything easy to understand all the biochemistry, I am all more than welcome for that one for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Janine. And if you guys have any questions, check it out.
Alrighty.
So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Subscribe, rate, and share info.